and how can we make sure we start to drive the cost down on solar. So the study I wanted to start by talking about, we started with a survey, 2019, phone survey, 451 people. I don't know if anyone here got that phone call, but it was a random survey of people in Regina, landline, cell phone, and asked a few questions, some questions about, do you support the 100% renewable target? Found strong support for that, but then also started to ask some questions about solar, and specifically wanted to understand a bit more about whether people had, move my head here, do people have roofs where you could install solar? In their own opinion, did they think they had that, where they could install solar, had a south-facing roof, not shaded by trees? Just over half of the people said that yes, they did. And if they said yes, they did, we'd ask them, would you be willing to install solar? If they said yes, what would you need to do that? Would you do it if you had to pay extra? Would you do it if you broke even? Or would you need a payback? And so, not a lot of people said they want to pay extra for it. Buttons here. If they did say they'd be willing to pay extra, we asked for a random value. Okay, would you be willing to pay $40? If they said no, okay, how about 20? We kind of went up and down this payment ladder to see where they'd land. If they said they needed a financial return, again, ask for a random amount. If you got $10 back per month, would you install solar? No, okay, what about $20 a month? And so we kept doing that to get a sense of that net return people needed to get from solar in order to feel that they would install it. Put that all together, you have this look at how many of those households would adopt at different levels of return. So the positive numbers, this is the net solar cost, so it's kind of reversed, but if you have a positive number, you actually pay extra for solar. Again, not many people in that boat, maybe 6% of people were willing to do that. Once you ask, break even, 27% of people would do it if they break even, and then once you get into the financial returns, as the returns get higher, more and more people are willing to do it. So we had that data on whether people could install solar, how much they want to earn on a return, and then I worked with some engineers out of the University of Victoria to do some modeling of rooftops in Regina. So actually got GIS data for every rooftop, analyzed to see the slope of it, to see whether there was shading, and we were able to calculate what's the solar output for every one of those roofs. And then we needed to understand, from a policy perspective, what kind of return could you expect to get? What could you get under the old net metering program? What do you get under the new program? I call it net billing, since I sort of think the net meter is not really, the meter's not really reversing anymore. You are, it's a credit on your bill that recognizes that you've sold solar to the grid. So what's the return on that? Now, to do that, you really need to have this smart meter data where you see the shape of people's consumption. You see when they're consuming, when that load happens. As we just heard, we don't have that for all of Saskatchewan yet. People like Corey are working to make that happen by putting the smart meters in. Saskatoon Light and Power does have that. So actually I was able to get some of their data and match Saskatoon data with Regina rooftops and get a sense of what's their solar output going to look like. And so this is a typical kind of day where you'd see in the blue what's load looking like. This looks a bit like Doug's load figures where it jumps up and down depending if you turn on your dryer or your dishwasher or whatever it might be. And then your solar is going to generally have this this increase until you got the sun right above you, assuming there's no clouds. Whenever you're generating excess, we know that that's when you're sending power back to Sask Power. And in the old net metering program, you would get the residential rate for that. Now you get that 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So just to give you a sense of how much would get sent back to the grid, a day like this, about 48% of it is self-consumption, so that's the house can use. Then anything that in this region here, above the blue, you can kind of see that it's transparent, so you kind of see where you're sending power back to the grid. Just over half sent back to Sask Power, and of course there's no solar available at night. So on this day, this household got 29.2 kilowatt hours of usage. Here's what they would have got based on their solar output and the old net metering, so they're offset $3 worth of costs because they've got that residential rate they're getting paid. The new, they're getting paid that residential rate when they're self-consuming, so they're avoiding buying from Sask Power, but when they're selling to Sask Power, they're getting that 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So now you're down to from $3 to $2.23. So this is the kind of exercise we did to understand how much the economics would change going from the old to the new policy. This is just a look at, let's make this go away somehow, I don't know. There we go. This is a distribution. So of all of the households and rooftops we modeled, if there's more that end up in a certain monthly net return, you see monthly net return on the bottom x-axis. Hopefully you're all up to date on your graphic. X-axis there on the bottom. So if you're at $20, you can see it's a bit of a higher peak in that top ridge. That means more of the households under net metering would have had that $20 monthly net return. But there's a bit of a taper there where some households could actually generate 40 or up to $60 monthly net return. Net billing starts to push that distribution back, so there's not those big returns anymore from solar, which is part of what changed when the program changed. That last bit there, if you add in the Greener Homes grant, where you get some money up front for putting in solar, that actually starts to put things back to look like the old net metering, because you've got that capital cost coming down due to that loan. So that actually helps in quite a significant way. I think it's interesting and good to hear the city of Regina is thinking about this PACE program, give lower interest loans. That's going to also help homeowners finance that capital at lower cost, make sure these projects can go ahead. So what do we find? What do we find for adoption with these different policies? With net metering, based on our survey, based on the rooftop data, you might have gotten 30% of households in Regina to put solar on their roofs. With the net billing, that's probably down to, our estimate's 23%, so you lose some. You're going from what would have been 94 megawatts to 74 megawatts, and what would have been 133 gigawatt hours a year to 105 gigawatt hours a year. So some capacity, but we're not going to meet all of Regina's electricity needs with that rooftop solar. This is an image from the city of Regina. They use 230 gigawatt hours per year for their own city operations. If you put every 30% of households have solar, you're meeting maybe half of what the city operations require. But to get all of the city's electricity needs, that's about 2,500 gigawatt hours a year. You're going to need a lot more renewable energy. And if you start to electrify vehicles and heat, you're going to need even more. So rooftop solar could have played a role, but it wasn't going to give us the whole package, at least just on residential. You heard from Wyatt, some of those commercial buildings or city buildings, you can put a lot more solar on, so that'll be necessary if we really want to up the renewable content in Regina. Okay, so why would we move away from that in this era of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? My explanation from an economics point of view is, and we heard it from the SAS Power, part of it is the billing system that we have doesn't really reflect the structure of SAS Power's costs. And we need to think about what are these different costs related to generation. So in economics, we've got variable costs, things that change depending on how much you're generating. So if you're generating more with a natural gas plant, you're using more fuel, you're paying more carbon pricing. You've got some operations and maintenance that you need to do more of as you run your plants more, so that's the variable O&M. You've got capacity costs, which you heard more about. That's Corey's area where he's got to size his lines and make sure the power system can meet the peak load at the biggest, darkest, coldest night in Regina. There's some cold night in December where everyone puts their turkeys in the ovens, I think, and puts the Christmas lights on. So 3,800 megawatts of peak load. And this is my analogy for it. It's kind of like since someone is building a parking lot, if you got to build it for the Black Friday or Christmas shopping season when the parking lot's going to be full, even though most of the time the parking lot's not going to be full. So you got to oversize your systems right now with the way we've been doing things. So you've got to think about that peak is contributing to some of your costs. And then there's some fixed costs. Some of maybe the advertising, the building, those don't change depending on the size of your system or how much energy you're generating. So those are held constant. But there are three different kinds of costs, and we're rolling a lot of them, most of them, into the residential rate, which indicates how much you pay per kilowatt hour. Looks like it's a variable cost because you use more, you pay more, but a lot of those demand or capacity costs are folded into that charge. I think I see some nodding in SAS Power. This is how you see the world too. It's too high. It's too high from how much you want to pay solar. It's also too high from what customers should be paying for that variable electricity. It's too high. Part of the what it disincentivizes is it disincentivizes electrifying vehicles and heating if you've got that high cents per kilowatt hour charge, because it's not representing the true cost. Now you could change the billing system. I did some consultation actually with Martin and I back in 2017 to look at solar programs. One of the ideas that came up was to change the way you bill, actually separate out line by line. Here's how much it's going to cost for your transmission, your distribution. It's made up to how you do it, Corey, but you know, different parts of this. The demand charges get separated from the variable charges, and you've got a peak capacity demand charge in there too. So industrial customers in Saskatchewan, they've got to pay cost per kilowatt for how much they contribute to peak demands, because that's how big you're going to build your parking lot or how big you have to build your generation system. Households don't do that. You could move to that. And so that would give an incentive for the kinds of microgrids that Doug talked about, where if you're getting charged, if you're plugging in your Ford Lightning during peak hours, and you're gonna have to pay a whole bunch now next year for your peak demand charge, that's gonna incentivize you to put a timer on your EV charger or get a electric storage system set up so you can change when you're buying and selling power. If you do that, you're gonna lower that variable volumetric charge, that cents per kilowatt hour charge. That's going to incentivize EVs, it's going to incentivize electric heat. I think it's better. It solves some of the problems. It does create that problem of, well, you're not going to pay much for solar if you're doing that metering program, but we'll get to that in a second. We maybe get to no regrets solar policy there. So that's lower than the residential rates. If you're just talking avoided fuel from a gas plant, maybe that's 4 cents a kilowatt hour, maybe it's higher, maybe it's 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour. It's lower than the retail rate anyway. So if you're generating solar, you're gonna ramp down your gas plant, save some fuel. That's gonna be worth less to SAS Power than that residential rate. So it makes sense why they don't want to keep paying for that. But it's not just the fuel avoided, you gotta think about the pollution avoided. So you can look at, as we put a price on pollution, carbon pricing is putting a price on a negative externality, as we call it in economics, the impact of that pollution on our climate and the impact of those climate damages on all of us. So as you do that, you start to have that extra savings, which is that avoided pollution cost. We're at $65 a ton carbon price right now. The actual marginal damage cost of carbon is probably more like $250 a ton, according to the Government of Canada's estimates. So we're actually underpricing carbon right now. It should be $250 a ton, not $65. We'll get to $170 a ton by 2030. That adds 7 cents a kilowatt hour in terms of that avoided fuel and carbon charge. So we'd actually want to think about, when you're avoiding the fuel and you're avoiding the pollution, there's a value to that avoided pollution. So that could be a basis for compensating people who are getting SAS Power to run those plants less. Now, as SAS Power gets cleaner, you're offsetting less and less emissions, so there's some race there between how fast the carbon price goes up and how clean SAS Power gets. But that's something to consider as we do the rate design. Now, we also should be striving to drive down the cost of that rooftop solar. We have an industry that sort of took off for a little bit, dipped down again. We can look to other jurisdictions to try to understand how do you drive down those rooftop solar costs. Australia, move myself again here. I don't know if you knew this, anyone in the audience knew this, but about a third of rooftops in Australia have rooftop solar in place right now. It's total in Australia, 26 gigawatts of solar, 16.5 gigawatts on roofs. So a lot of their solar is on roofs, and they've driven the cost down. They were, in Canadian equivalents, over $5,000 a kilowatt in 2011. That's been driven down to close to 1,700 Canadian per kilowatt in 2020. So they've driven those costs down. Some of the studies looking at how they did it. One is you've got this market that's been consistent over time. So they've got a consistent policy, allows the suppliers, the installers to build up the experience, people to get more familiar with the technology. So that I was mentioning that you need the roofer and the electrician both to have the right training to put this stuff in place and to be able to lower those costs. We think about some of that as the soft cost. The panels keep getting cheaper, but now we got to work on getting that installation cost down, where suppliers they don't have to, maybe a future when we've got the grid modernized, they don't have to pay for an interconnection study. We know you can interconnect, you can get on the roof tomorrow if you give a phone call to the solar installer. You can do that in Australia now, so they've done that. So we can drive those costs down and hopefully make it so that those lines cross, so that we can get, we've got net billing, I think it's set to be 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour till 2026. I'm sure to be reviewed then, but if we can get that cost of rooftop solar, the orange line, to get driven down, and we'll see that avoided savings for fuel and pollution is the blue line. That's going to keep going up. At some point they cross, and so at some point you could be giving a level of compensation that's going to give those net returns to the homeowners that we've surveyed in Regina, where they're going to want to do this kind of project again. So how do we do this? One idea: make sure as we review net billing, we start to line it up so it's both avoided fuel and it's avoided pollution, and so that net billing rate can go up as that avoided fuel and carbon cost goes up. Redesign the rates, probably easier said than done. I think people probably talk about that internal to SaskPower and external, but you could start to move things where you've got more fixed charges on your bill. It lowers your cents per kilowatt hour charge, so it's going to be cheaper for you to go and charge a vehicle, but you do have this big chunky fixed charge. One of the problems with having those chunky fixed charges, I'm going to do it for time. We're skipping the plan. We're all going to go eat pizza, so my apologies for that. If you've got these higher fixed costs, low-income households end up having to pay more than they used to, potentially, if you change the rate billing approach. So, why is that? Well, low-income households generally using less electricity. It's another one of these kind of bridge plots, squiggly graphs. The first one at the bottom, number 1, is low-income households. The x-axis here is how much they spend on electricity. Low-income households generally, this is all the households we have data for in Saskatchewan, generally spending less, so the ridge is higher for those lower levels of spending. When you get up to higher income levels, you've got that ridge extending up to, looks like mainly the highest point is $1,600 a year, but you've got people spending $2,000, $3,000 a year. On electricity, they would have big savings by moving to that fixed charge and taking the volumetric charge down. So you can think about ways to make sure that doesn't get punitive for low-income households. What California has done is actually move to that system in the higher fixed charges, but make them means tested. So they've actually stepped up. If you're a low-income household, you have a lower fixed charge than the next tier, You keep going up 5 different steps. Overall, the utility still gets the same revenue, but you collect it in a way that's means tested, so it's income tested, which means it's more progressive. It's going to be less of a burden on those low-income households. So that's a way to move to the right kind of rates, incentive structure, but avoid hurting low-income people. If you do that, here's a chart looking at 2030 using some modeling data. This comes out of a study from the Canadian Climate Institute that I contributed to. The dark blue, how much average households spend by income quintile, again, the 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is the lowest income, 5 highest income groups. The dark blue, how much you'd spend per year on average with their usual rate design. If you put the means tested fixed charge in there, make it as progressive as your income tax system is, you can actually see that average expenditure drop for low-income households. That kind of lighter blue line is what you'd have with the means tested fixed charges. And you'd see that, the 5th quintile has a higher cost, but put it in perspective, look at the share of their expenditures as a share of their income. They're only paying 1% of their income on electricity, so a 10% increase for them isn't going to be as much of a hit as it is for the low-income households where they're paying 2, 4, 6, 8% of their income for electricity. So it starts to deal with some of those affordability problems. Okay. How do we drive down the cost? Well, can we move towards more of an Australian model? We've got a long-term policy signal that keeps that solar industry going, that builds the experience. Can that help reduce the soft costs? Ideas to ponder. I don't know. Let's keep talking about it. One thing Australia has is the households can pre-sell their carbon credits. So they're getting the value for reducing pollution on the grid. They pre-sell those. That brings down the capital cost when they install their system. Again, incentivizes installation. I got one more. No, I'm going to run out of the building after I show this last one. Maybe you break up SaskPower. Maybe you separate the distribution transmission from the generation side. Corey's the new CEO of SAS Grid. And at SAS Grid, their job is to, they can earn a fixed rate of return on their capital investments, so they make the investments that we need, they modernize the grid, we mandate at SAS Grid to modernize the grid, we get smart meters, we get the high capacities, we get EVs, we do heat pumps, and we get to the point where we know we can pre-approve that anybody can install solar because we've modernized the grid, so we don't need more connection studies for use of soft costs. So those are my ideas to ponder over pizza and beverages. I can take a couple questions. I think we've got just 5 minutes left here. Unless I should run out the back door. But well, I will stop there. Any questions here or? No, everyone's ready for pizza, I think. Eh? We can chat more also in the pizza room. All good. Okay.
Just some last words. Pizza is in CK 185 where we were last time. What we've actually done is we've tried to organize the tables, or I hope we have organized the tables into sort of more round tables, and we actually have a set of questions that we have put on each table. You don't have to talk about it. You can complain about the riders instead if that's what your preference is. But we actually also, I hope anyway, we'll have some students there who will be like note takers, so that we're going to try to collect whatever your thoughts are about some of those questions or anything else connected to topics that we talked about in today's symposium. We thank you so much for coming down for this event. CK 185 is just turning, you go towards kinesiology, and it's the first door on the left there. We really do hope that you will all come, because as I say, we have pizza for 80 and we don't have 80 in the room. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you.
Recording stopped.